And welcome, everybody, to the third ever episode of the Sports with Scott podcast. I'm your host, always, Scott Reichel, once again going solo for this pod. Should be a fun one. We're going to cover a couple of topics. First episode we've had in a while. I believe the last episode came out about a month ago, and you might be wondering, where have I been? The answer is with COVID. That's where I've been. So my voice has been kind of on the fritz. Still been doing the gambling shows on the side, but the point is my voice has not exactly allowed me to record long podcasts. So I've kind of had to put myself on the shelf. So because of that, now I'm officially back. My throat is still, a little bit iffy, but it's a lot better than it was. And it seems like I've made basically a full recovery. So hopefully it stays that way. I believe that's my fourth time getting COVID. So yeah, not exactly the best immune system I got over here. But the point is now I am healthy. So the show is going to come back. Now, to remind everybody of the last thing that we talked about the price of fandom. And we also talked about how to create a winning culture in sports. And that's going to kind of segue us into the NCAA tournament. But I'm going to get into that in a second. Instead, I'm going to focus on the other realm of content that I actually promote on my own time, which is gambling, because we had a couple of athletes involved in gambling scandals over the last week and change. You had Ohtani with the Dodgers, and you also had Jontay Porter from the Raptors. So I'm going to mention both those scandals quickly. Then I'll get into my overall thoughts and takeaways. Then we'll transition over to the NCAA tournament, both the games that happened on Thursday as well as the tournament as a whole up to this point. But starting off with the actual controversies with Ohtani and Porter, most people know what I'm talking about, unless you've been living under a rock. Ohtani is the most well-known baseball player in the world right now. He's going to make a lot of money in deferred payments from the Dodgers for the next 30 years, give or take. But the point is he signed a contract for a boatload of money, and he has an interpreter because he is from Japan. So his English is, maybe not the best, and he wants to make sure that nothing he says gets misinterpreted. So because of that, he has his own interpreter. The problem was Ipe, his interpreter, allegedly stole $4.5 million of his money to pay off gambling debts from an alleged illegal bookie in California, and as a result, that is now under federal investigation. So there's a couple of, I'd say, areas to dive into from the scandal. First of all, how much was Ohtani actually involved? B, there's really a lot to unpack here, but it's mostly going to come down to if Ohtani knew about it or if he was the one betting, and now they're using Ipe as a fall guy to save Ohtani's reputation. A lot of conspiracy theories. I know that, of course, the main defense right now is Ohtani did not know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. I just noticed that there was money missing from my account, and I had to piece together the dots there, to connect the dots, and it turned out that my interpreter, who I've known for a while, is a scumbag. That's basically the defense they're going with right now. The question is, do I believe it? And the question is, do I think anything's going to happen to Ohtani? To address the second thing first, I think anything's going to happen to him. No, I think Ohtani is too important to baseball. He's the face of the league, both domestically and international right now. So I don't think anything's going to happen to him. And I do think at the end of the day, the MLB will, of course, allow the news cycle to take its course, but I expect to not really hear about it moving forward. I think that there's going to be some jokes on social media anytime Ohtani, especially in gambling Twitter, anytime Ohtani doesn't hit somebody's parlay, they're going to make a comment about it. But do I think it's going to be something brought up constantly in the future? No, I don't. I think that it's a bad look for baseball, and I think that the league is going to try to sweep it under the rug as much as possible. And I do think that based on the explanations from Ohtani and his camp, I think it's a bunch of nonsense. Now, it's going to sound a bit conspiracy theory-ish, but you got to remember that I am in the gambling sphere. So I'm pretty familiar with a lot of, I'd say, behind-the-scenes stuff going on with bookies and stuff like that. So here's the part that I really have a hard time wrapping my head around. Couple of parts. One, I don't care how much money you're making. You're telling me that you didn't notice your interpreter was running around with $4.5 million of your own money? I just don't believe that. I feel like it's a spot where, first of all, I don't even know what type of money wiring operation he had going, but $4.5 million is a ton of money. And I believe he sent it directly to a sports book, if I'm not mistaken, which is an extreme issue. But I mostly have an issue with Ohtani's explanation of him not knowing anything, and he didn't know it all. I find it hard to believe that your interpreter, who's basically your best friend, who you're around all the time, you know a lot about him. You had no idea that he was gambling on the side, no matter how long you've known him. you had no idea. I just don't believe that for a second. I think that that is an extremely, I'd say, convenient excuse that I just don't buy. I think that even if you have your own personal friends in your own lives, a lot of you probably know some of the hobbies that your friends have, maybe not all of them. But I think I would be able to tell if one of my friends had a serious gambling problem, and I think that I'd probably be able to decipher that based on maybe their mood or maybe their fluctuation of money. Now I'm assuming that with the Dodgers and with Ohtani, basically, having him on the payroll, that money was not really an issue for Ipe in general. But still, if I was with friends and they're sweating out bets, I would be able to tell. So maybe Ohtani claims he didn't realize. I have a hard time believing that. I think that if you are around somebody long enough, and it seems like these two guys were pretty close together because of the time they spent together over the years, there's no way Ohtani did not know that he owed $4 million. I just don't buy that. I think that Ohtani definitely knew that he had a gambling issue, and I do think that, once again, that's assuming that none of the bets were from Ohtani. That's purely assuming that Ipe actually is a massive gambling has a massive gambling problem, and he is a really bad bettor because he was down $4.5 million, allegedly all on soccer. Apparently, none of it was on baseball, which I find kind of interesting. If it was on baseball, that would be a much bigger scandal. But the fact that it was on a separate sport maybe isn't as serious, or maybe it kind of, I'd say, lessens the overall potency of the fire with this investigation. But it's still a bad look of the best player in the league who just made a bunch of money during the offseason with the Dodgers with that contract is betting on sports in general. Then again, if he's betting on other sports, I don't really care. I don't know what him betting on soccer has to do with him with him being a baseball player. But there's a lot of, once again, different areas to analyze. But one explanation is Ohtani didn't know, plead ignorance, and this guy went rogue. So I don't buy that for a second. I think even if Ohtani was not placing bets, he definitely knew that his friend and his interpreter liked to gamble. There's no way he did not know that. I just refuse to believe it. Just based on how you interact with your own friends, you can tell what they like and what they're into and what their hobbies are. You could tell if your friend was down millions of dollars sweating out random international soccer games at 2 in the afternoon. I think you can probably tell. So I don't buy that excuse. The other conspiracy, or I don't buy that, I'd say, explanation. The other explanation is that Ohtani was betting and he did not want it to be revealed. So he's using the interpreter as a scapegoat, and he's basically saying that the interpreter has the gambling problem, not me. Everybody look over here. This is a diversion. That's basically what he's doing. I can get behind this. There's a couple reasons for it. First of all, I'm not sure how many people who listen to the show have ever had to deal with a bookie or with some type of offshore betting site. But the argument that he would be getting, this random interpreter would be getting a line of credit of $4.5 million, I think is insane. And I think a lot of people who are in the gambling, I'd say, industry who actually bet using bookies know how insane that actual idea even is. That you could imagine being down to a random bookie 10 grand, decent amount of money. They're going to try to come after you to get it. It's how it's going to go. $4.5 million. I don't know how many people, unless you are a billionaire or you have like a massive gambling enterprise, would ever be allowed that much credit without having to pay, or at least paying up front. So I don't buy that. I think that it's insane to argue that this random bookie is looking at Ohtani's interpreter going, oh yeah, let's give him a line of credit of like $4.5 million to bet with, and he can pay after and settle all of his debts. I don't buy that for a second. That doesn't make any sense. Or if that did happen, that's one of the dumbest bookies of all time. Because there's no way you're going to end up letting this random guy owe $4 million who could potentially run away, potentially flee. And the point is, if you're running a full-on business, letting a guy potentially run away or like avoid paying his $4+ million debts is obviously not good business. It's reckless and it's stupid. I don't think any bookie's that stupid. So I think that if you're talking about the overall credibility that either Ohtani or the interpreter had with the bookie, that means the bookie knew the guy had a bunch of money. And there's no way that he's going to assume that the interpreter has access to millions and millions of dollars to just bet with over the course of a couple weeks on international soccer. So I don't buy that. That is where Ohtani betting makes a lot of sense. Because if you can make the argument that the bookie knew Ohtani was the one placing the bets, then I can buy into that 4.5 million line of credit where Ohtani could settle his debts afterwards after he lost all that money. That's where that conspiracy, I think, holds a lot of water. I think it makes sense because if you were going to be doing this type of operation, maybe you're not familiar with betting, maybe it's not your cup of tea. The point is, if you had some type of investment company, imagine that you're giving out a loan to somebody. You'd be a lot more likely to give out a loan to a guy with a bunch of money in his bank account than a guy with nothing, or a guy that is an underling for one of the high profile guys. And that's kind of the same idea because in the line of credit for betting, you can kind of compare it to a loan in a way where they're giving you a certain amount of money, or I should say money up front, that you can use. And eventually you have to pay it all back if you lose. If you win it, then of course they're not going to pay you for the initial amount you ended up getting from them, but you get to keep the winnings. And that's kind of the same idea as a loan in general. So if you're not familiar with betting, then that's going to be the comparison that I'm going to use. I'm going to compare it to a bank loan. Let's compare it that way. The point is, it involves a lot of trust and a lot of credibility for a random bank or for a random bookie to voluntarily offer you $4+ million of credit with an IOU attached to it, saying, I'm good for it, you're going to get paid. I don't buy that. I think that's a bunch of nonsense, and that's why I actually think Ohtani was betting. That's my stance on that theory, or that conspiracy. I think Ohtani was betting, or I at least think he knew about it. Do I think Ipe was placing bets on behalf of Ohtani? Probably. I don't believe Ohtani would have been trying to get his own hands dirty. Most of these celebrities in general have a middleman, so that way, if anything goes bad, they can blame it on the other guy and say that he went rogue, kind of like what happened right now. But it's really the line of credit. The idea that the interpreter had the ability to rack up a $4+ million debt on a bookie and then just, the bookie was okay with it, I don't think makes any sense at all. So I think Ohtani knew about it. I think that he might have even been involved with some of the bets with Ipe, or maybe he was doing all the bets. I think Ipe was probably gambling too. But the point is, I do think you're looking at a scandal where that's going to be covered up. They're going to hope that the news cycle finds something else to focus on. But do I think Ohtani was betting? Yes, I do. I think he at least knew about it, and I do think that this whole plead ignorance argument is absolute garbage. Moving on to the next scandal, we're going to go to the NBA as Jontay Porter, a.k.a. Michael Porter Jr.'s brother, was an NBA player for the Toronto Raptors, backup center, and he recently was it's a subject of an investigation because there are rumors that he ended up betting or he manipulated betting markets by sabotaging his own player props. And there was one parlay that I saw on Twitter. I'm not sure how accurate or how real this actual screenshot is. For the sake of it, though, let's assume that it's a real ticket. It goes back to a game against Sacramento, and there was a 3-pick, actually, no, it was more. It was a 5-pick parlay, all unders on a Jontay Porter. And to go through the actual props, I only have 3 of them listed in the screenshot. It was under 8.5 points, under 4.5 assists, under 1.5 3-pointers made. I'm assuming 5.5 was rebounds in there. You had under half a 3 probably. And I'm not sure what the other one was. Maybe under half a block or under half a steal, something. But the point is, those are 4 of the 5 legs that I can decipher. It was 80 grand on DraftKings to win $1.1 million. And this is where it gets a bit sketchy because Porter in that game played a grand total of 3 minutes. He played 3 minutes. So he played in the game. Of course, he went under in every single stat. Then apparently he re-aggravated his eye, or an eye injury that he had, quote unquote, and then he ended up leaving the game and he never returned. So that was the main game that's under the microscope right now. And Porter's also involved in some type of investment Discord or whatever, and he has a paywall, I guess, behind a secret room. So people are arguing that he might have been tipping people off into that Discord on which player props to bet particularly on him, to bet his unders because he was going to tank games in order to make people money. Now, this is a massive scandal. This is a much bigger scandal based on the overall subject of the matter than Ohtani. Because Ohtani, at the end of the day, if he actually was the one betting, he was not betting his own sport, which is a big deal. Because if he's betting soccer, at the end of the day, it's a bad look for Ohtani's reputation. Does it really matter that much? Like, not really, kind of. I mean, you think about it, the guy's got $600, $700 million coming in for the next 30, 40 years. He can do whatever he wants with the money. But the point is, it's a bad look when the face of your league is down $4 million betting and you're trying to kind of paint him as a goody two shoes. But this one's a lot worse because this one is a crime. Just the idea of manipulating betting markets while playing in games is definitely illegal. And that's extremely, extremely dangerous for the reputation of the league. Because for baseball, once again, no baseball bets being placed by Ippei or Ohtani is a big deal. And I have to keep mentioning that because that does involve the idea, or it does dismiss the idea, that Ohtani was ruining the integrity of the sport because the bets he was making were not involved on that sport. For Porter, imagine a player betting on his unders and you're trying to paint your product as legitimate and you're trying to claim that everybody has a chance to win and you're partnering with a bunch of betting platforms, DraftKings, FanDuel, you see ads for them all the time for the NBA. Imagine trying to actually sell the idea to NBA fans to join these platforms to bet on a sport that might be rigged. Like that's what we're talking about right now. Now, of course, nobody would have really known about this at the time because Jontay Porter is a relative unknown. And you can make the argument that it's one, I'd say, rogue person who ended up doing his own thing, and that doesn't reflect the entire, I'd say, nature of the integrity of the sport. But the problem is it's slippery slope because you can make the argument that it's going to snowball. And if one player or one referee, if you want to go back to Donaghy, is the one rigging games and trying to manipulate outcomes, then where do you draw the line? Because at some point, people are going to look at the scandal and go, why would I put any of my own money into this if I cannot actually trust the integrity of the product that I'm betting on? So this is a much bigger deal based on content. Ohtani's the name brand. That's why it's a bigger story right now. The Porter deal's massive because as a bettor, as a person who's been betting for basically 8 years at this point, if you told me that a sport was being bet on or had a bunch of money, billions of dollars changing hands every single day, and you told me the outcomes might be manipulated, that is a serious scandal that would not go away and that would kind of completely ruin the entire reputation of the entire league. Now, am I saying the NBA's reputation is going to be ruined from this? No. Once again, based on news cycle, I think eventually this is going to be swept under the rug. I think people are going to move on. And that's kind of why I wanted to bring up these 2 points, because the other realm that I'm in is betting based. And I wanted to talk about it because betting has become more mainstream, especially with them being increasingly legalized in different states. And now you kind of have this unstoppable force where gambling keeps getting promoted and gambling keeps kind of finding its way into spots it shouldn't be in. And the argument of players being involved in betting, whether it's on other sports or on their own sport, it's a slippery slope. And that's kind of the issue that gambling has kind of, I'd say, brought upon itself. And that's why a lot of people in different states were against gambling in the first place. They were worried about addicts and they were worried about potential integrity issues. And the integrity issues are here. And gambling addicts are definitely an issue, especially with how it's marketed, because you see FanDuel and DraftKings promoting all these insane parlays, all these live bets, all the crazy prop options, because they're trying to lure you in with free bets and all this other stuff, because they know long term you're going to lose all your money, kind of like a casino. And at that point, they have the disclaimer at the bottom because they have to, that yet that's to promote responsible gambling. They don't want to. They want to take all your money. They're not good people. That's kind of what I'm trying to tell you. So I can understand why gambling has always had a bad reputation and why the reputation has probably gotten worse over the last couple of months with more and more states legalizing. But either way, wanted to mention it. Do I think it's going to affect baseball at all? Not at all. Do I think that the scandal is going to affect basketball at all? Maybe in the short term, but in reality, probably not, because most people who bet the NBA are going to stay betting the NBA. And the amount of money that the NBA has made, that DraftKings has made, that FanDuel's made, pretty much any sports book that has access to the NBA with betting lines has made a ton of money. And I don't think it's going to change anything. At the end of the day, as long as the bottom dollar is not too heavily affected, and as long as these companies keep making money, nothing's going to change because it's good business. And as far as I can tell, the NBA brings in a lot of gambling money every single day. And now you have the playoffs around the corner, so betting might even increase based on amount. It's not going to change anything, but wanted to mention it. Maybe a couple of bettors are going to maybe reduce the unit size, bet less, or maybe just move to a different sport. But for the most part, if you were betting NBA before the scandal, guess what? You're probably betting the NBA after the scandal. So anyway, the point is, do I think it's going to have a big impact? No. But I think it's interesting, and I'll definitely follow this scandal as it progresses and as the investigation continues to progress over the next couple of weeks or maybe even months. Now, moving on to the other topic of conversation, the NCAA tournament, because we had a couple of really good games on Thursday, and I kind of want to talk about the actual tournament itself, mostly involving the idea of the best possible tournament you could have. And I don't mean going for a perfect bracket. That's not what I mean. What I mean is the type of tournament. Are you better off getting a bunch of upsets? Or are you better off getting a bunch of chalk? And this was a topic of conversation for the first couple of days in the event because there really were not many upsets, especially in the round of 32. I believe in those 16 games between those teams that were still alive in the round of 32, I believe only one betting underdog won outright, and I think the better seed won 14 of the 16 games. Gonzaga was favored, but they were a 5 seed against Kansas. The only underdog to win was Clemson, as they beat Baylor. So a lot of people were mad because I know that the public had a phenomenal weekend betting in college basketball because most of the public will always take the favorites to win, and the favorites cleaned house. So it was a great overall weekend for public bettors. Most bettors made a lot of money on the NCAA tournament over the weekend, but a lot of fans for college basketball and for overall, I'd say, just entertainment were a bit annoyed because you saw the projected winner winning basically every game. Now, nothing's going to compare to the women's tournament, which is a chalk fest every year. For reference, by the way, of course, in the round of 64, mathematically, you have 32 games. What if I told you that the better seed won 31 of the 32 games in the first round of the NCAA tournament for the women's side? 31 of 32 games. The only exception was Louisville, as they ended up losing in the first round. But the point is, both tournaments, both men and women's, were chalky, and a lot of people were mad because a lot of people want to root for Cinderella. They want to see a 10 seed, VCU, a Butler, one of those teams make a dream run. We saw San Diego State last year. We have seen a bunch of Cinderella runs over the years. And Aaron and Andrew Harrison making a dream run with Kentucky. They ended up losing to UConn in the final, but I believe they were an 8 or a 9 seed. The point is that a lot of people want to root for Cinderellas. You want to root for Golke from Oakland. You want to root for a lot of players from kind of under the radar schools that you were hoping would make a deep run. And they ended up losing pretty early in the event. And the only team right now, the only double-digit seed left in the event is NC State. Every other team that is in it is a single-digit seed, and there were a lot of high seeds still in the event. Now, Auburn got upset in the first round against Yale. That was kind of crazy. You saw Kentucky lose to Oakland, which was wild, which is always fun, making fun of Calipari. But the point is, a lot of the top seeds did win. And entering the Thursday games, you had all the 1 seeds that were still alive. All the 2 seeds were still alive, from what I remember. And the 3 seeds you ended up having, I believe all of them besides Kentucky were still alive. So besides Baylor ended up losing. So you had a lot of 3 seeds left, all the 2 seeds left, and all the 1 seeds left. And people were mad because they wanted some upsets. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's kind of pick your own poison here. Because on one hand, the favorites winning most of the first round matchups and most of the second round matchups, yes, you could argue that takes away from the allure of the NCAA tournament because you are there to see the Cinderellas match up against the big dogs, to see the Davids potentially beat the Goliaths, and that didn't happen. However, the issue you run into if you get what you want for the first couple rounds is a lot of, I'd say, miracle dream runs by smaller schools. And how does it end? They get absolutely destroyed by the big schools every single time. That's what happens. So you get a lot of really bad games late in the tournament. On the other side, you have what happened this year, which is not many upsets, a couple here or there. You had Oakland beating Kentucky, you had Yale beating Yale beating Auburn, you had Duquesne beating BYU. So you had a couple of upsets in there, but nothing that was insane like FDU beating Purdue, for example, as a 16 beating a 1 or a 15 beating a 2. That didn't happen. But still, the point is, this year, it was pretty quiet for the most part for the first couple of days. And with that being the case, you were greeted to a bunch of really good and really competitive Sweet 16 games, especially on the first day, because you ended up seeing Bedlam. You saw North Carolina as a 1 seed lose to Alabama in a crazy game by 2. You saw Clemson beat Arizona, so the 2 seed lost. So the 1 and the 2 seed lost in the same region on Thursday. UConn's UConn, so unfortunately they kill everybody. They won by 30 against San Diego State. And you had a good game last night after the North Carolina game because Illinois and Iowa State came down to the wire. So if you're doing the math at home, that does mean that 3 of the 4 underdogs did win yesterday. But the point that I'm trying to make is that 3 of the 4 games were decided by 5 points or less. And you probably would not have gotten that if you had New Mexico, for example, making the run instead of Clemson. If you ended up having Dayton making the run instead of Arizona, that game probably wouldn't have been close. You get what I'm trying to say. The point is, I think that at the end of the day, I prefer to see less upsets in the first round so we get much better matchups as the tournament progresses. Because you might remember, for example, speaking of Kentucky, St. Peter's, they had the phenomenal upset win against Kentucky. You ended up having a nice dream run by them where they also beat Purdue. They had a crazy run. They faced off against North Carolina. How'd that go? They lost by 30. You got my point. Most of the time, the Cinderellas get killed. It's a matter of when, not if, but when. And when that's the case, there's not many games on TV, and you get an absolute stinker, which sucks. So for me, I like to see the best of the best going against each other with the stakes being higher and with less games on TV. Because if you get a bad game in the round of 64, the favorites are winning. There's multiple games on at the same time. You can change it. You can find something that's more competitive. You don't have that option in the last couple of rounds. So with that being the case, I do like to see great matchups on paper in the later rounds, which might result in less upsets in the earlier rounds. And that's what I prefer. So for my take on the crazy bracket versus relatively chalky bracket, I prefer the chalk early, then you get some chaos late. And that's what we ended up getting on Thursday. So that's my perfect blend. Some people only want the chaos early. They want to root for all the mid-major schools to make a dream run and to maybe be a miraculous champion. Most of the time, that's not going to happen. They're going to lose at some point. So for me, I was a big fan of the games yesterday. My brackets absolutely hated the games yesterday. Separate story. But I liked what I saw yesterday, and you probably would not have gotten that many competitive games on one night if you had multiple Cinderellas upsetting top seeds in the first couple rounds. So that's my thoughts on the NCAA tournament so far. As for the games, I'll dive into the games quickly. I was going to do a deep dive. I thought about doing it a day or two ago on coaches in the NCAA tournament. I was going to talk about Kentucky, talk about Arizona, well, Arizona didn't happen yet, but I still can do that. I was going to do a deep dive on my overall opinion of some coaches, maybe what makes a good coach, what makes a bad coach, stuff like that. Maybe I'll get to that at some point, but I decided it might take too long for now. So I'm going to wait till after the tournament, maybe go back to it. A lot of content for that in the NBA based on the Celtics this past week and the Bucks blowing that 19-point lead to the Lakers. So we'll put that on the back burner. That's going to be on the list of things to do. Maybe I'll do a brief coaching analysis. But for the most part, want to stay with the NCAA tournament, want to talk about some of the games yesterday. And to go into some of those games, I feel like a lot of us always forget, even though that I know we're betting now, and of course you have your own brackets, and you're going to be extremely harsh towards players. A reminder that a lot of these guys are kids, and I feel like I bring this up because there was one player who I wanted to discuss who made a really bad decision late in a game. And first of all, the two worst players on the court last night were RJ Davis and Caleb Love. They were absolutely awful. And it's kind of a coincidence because they were on the same team as they made the title game with North Carolina a couple of years ago. And Caleb Love uh, and RJ Davis were awful yesterday. But anyway, the main point I want to make was Withers, who was the backup power forward or so for Carolina. And he took one of the dumbest shots imaginable in that game, late in that game. There's about 103 left. North Carolina's up one, and there's 15 on the shot clock. So once again, they're winning. And Withers this season is a casual 21.1% three-point shooter. 21.1%. And he just ends up getting the ball because they're double teaming RJ Davis and they kick it out to him. 15 on the shot clock. You figure, okay, they're going to give it back to Davis, run a pick and roll with Baycott, try to get something going. And Withers absolutely chucks this damn thing. Absolute brick. Then Alabama goes on the other end, gets an and one from a foul from Withers. So Withers indirectly or maybe directly blew the entire game in 30 seconds. And everybody was being harsh against him. And I kind of wanted to briefly talk about it because I want to talk about if it's actually fair or not to criticize student athletes or whatever you want to call them now because of NIL. Is it fair to be harsh towards them? Because on one hand, they have been playing basketball their entire lives and they should know what to do in most situations. On the other hand, they're not really professionals. They're still very young. Basically, what I'm asking is, are you a dick for being mean or being, I'd say, extremely angry towards players who are in the middle of taking college classes? And it's an interesting conversation to have because I'm the kind of guy who will not at players. I'm not going to go that far and beyond. I'm not going to send death threats. That's an extremely scummy thing to do. You should arguably get some type of fine or potentially an arrest for that. I think there's no place for death threats at all in sports. So just to be clear, I'm not going to at anybody. I'm not going to wish ill on anybody's family or anybody health-wise. But do I think it's fair to call somebody out for making a dumb decision in a game, no matter how old the player is? Within reason, of course. I'm not saying to curse out your, like, I don't know if you're a parent and you're going to like your kid's soccer match. You probably shouldn't curse out the 12-year-old goalie. Is not what I'm trying to tell you. But if you're watching a college game and one player is just playing like an absolute idiot, I think you do have the right to tweet about it or at least to be critical of their performance. But do it within reason. Don't go out there and send death threats. Don't do all this other stuff. And I bring it up because I'm assuming Withers and RJ Davis are going to be getting a lot of hate mail, either via DMs on Instagram or via even mail, maybe to their respective families. If you're listening to this, don't do that. That's an extremely dumb and really just an awful thing to do as a human being. So I wanted to mention that, not really as a full PSA, but kind of a built-in PSA. I wanted to at least talk about it because I tweeted a couple of things about the Wither shot selection. It was a moronic shot. There's no way around it. If you watch basketball enough, you know that it was a dumb shot at the time. You could argue that Withers shouldn't have even been in the game, but that's a whole separate conversation with Davis as the coach. But I wanted to bring it up because that was the main play from last night. It was the Withers 3, which basically lost the game for North Carolina on the spot. And I wanted to talk about it because a lot of Twitter was in an uproar about it, calling him an idiot, making a bunch of jokes surrounding the stupidity of the shot. I think it was stupid. I tweeted about it. But once again, he's still a human being, still a college student. We know that Withers probably has no pro future. So he's either going to be playing in Europe somewhere or maybe even having an actual day job. The point is, he made a mistake. It happens. And even though all of my brackets are now destroyed because North Carolina lost, I am aware that he's still a person, and I'm not going to, go above and beyond of trying to curse this guy out. I wanted to say, though, I think it is fair game to be critical of these players, but don't do any personal attacks and don't do anything extremely scummy. That is my main point I want to end with, so that's where I'm going to wrap it up. But anyway, that's going to do for this actual episode. A little bit of a potpourri episode covering some gambling controversies in baseball and in the NBA. Then we pivoted over to the NCAA tournament. Looking forward to the games tonight, though, on Friday. Should be full of entertaining basketball. I know the NBA is still on. We got playoff pushes, some playing stuff coming up over the next couple of weeks. But to be honest, I think all of us are focused on college basketball. A couple of good games here. Gonzaga, Purdue should be good. Duke, Houston should be good. Creighton, Tennessee should be good. I really don't care at all about NC State and Marquette. No offense if you root for any of those teams. But either way, looking forward to being back with the show. So once again, apologies that I went off the grid for about a month. If you do like this podcast, but I was sick. Now I'm back. So we're going to be trying to keep a more consistent recording schedule moving forward. But until next time, find me on Twitter at Reichel Radio. A reminder, if you do want my actual betting picks, they are all free. Find them on my Twitter. I got podcasts, I got YouTube videos, all that stuff. But either way, until next time, good luck to all of you and all of your bets. If you are betting and if you are not betting, I will catch you next time. Bye, everyone.